Good evening and live from Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, the sun and fun capital of the world. It's ScaryCast. I'm Dr. John Stamey here with my co-host Mark Johnston from beautiful Niagara Falls, Canada. How you doing tonight, Mark?
Excellent, John. I was hoping to come down and see you guys in the Georgia Bigfoot Conference. It looked like you guys had a successful conference down there. I hope to see you soon at the UFO one. When is
That's
that
right.
again?
The World UFO Conference, that is June 29th. The venue will be unveiled next week. We're looking at a larger venue, which is going to be great. So I'll let everybody know, and we'll let everyone know on our ScaryCast broadcast that we will be doing next week. We got some great guests, and just check out. I'll make sure ScaryCast.com has the list of the guests. So anyway, it's really great to have you here. You've been with me for 6 years.
Absolutely. And some of my favorite podcasts have been with Matt Delph here. He's somebody I always look up to, and as far as information and as far as Bigfoot and other cryptids go, I always look forward to hear what he has to say. And I think tonight's going to be pretty interesting.
Well, he's talking about one of my favorite subjects. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight is the world famous Bigfoot hunter, monster hunter Matt Delph from Ewing, Virginia. I mean, I think they have one stoplight or maybe two flashing yellow lights. Hey, Matt, how you doing?
I'm doing great. And we have one caution light. It's just flashes. It
Oh,
doesn't
one.
actually do anything else.
I'm sorry. I was trying to give you some props. I say two caution lights or one stoplight, but that's great. We'll have to go to the city council and see if we can't get you a stoplight. But that's great. We're so happy to have you. I know we got to do things for all of our. And Matt is not only a guest tonight, but Matt's a co-host of ScaryCast. He'll be back as soon as he can be back. So look, thanks a lot, Matt. We're glad you're here. And tonight we've got
Glad
one
to
of
be
my
here.
favorite topics. New Orleans vampires. Two topics in one. New Orleans, what a great paranormal place. And vampires, I've loved vampires ever since I saw that great 1931 movie starring the world famous Bela Lugosi, the great Dracula. And he was incredible. And I've been fortunate enough to know his family and know some few secrets. We'll probably do an Ed Wood and Bela Lugosi episode here sometime this summer, and I'll share some of those with everybody. But anyway, Matt, tell us about your last couple trips down to New Orleans, and especially those dastardly guys known as the Carter brothers. Tell us about all that.
All right. As everybody knows, nicknamed the Badass Monster Hunter. Uh, so I hunt everything. It's just not Bigfoot. I go and I've always had this fascination for vampires. And I had recently, not long ago, not far from me, there was a vampire story about Vampire Rupp of Big Stone Gap, Virginia, which is probably about 40 minutes from where I live. So I looked into the history of that, and supposedly this vampire, he had drained the blood of. He come from England when the Big Stone Gap's a old deserted mining town, basically. Uh, they had, uh, the jobs were plentiful when the mines were up and going, but there was this one odd individual, and it was Mr. Rupp. So as the story goes on about him, he had supposedly he was strange. He kept to himself. Uh, all of a sudden, when he showed up to town, there was livestock that was drained of blood. Uh, it looked like what you would call like the cattle mutilation stuff that supposedly that the aliens do, but they were
Stop,
completely
Matt.
drained
I
of blood.
was I was going to ask you about that. Isn't it strange that there seems to be a correlation between vampires, people, and animals being drained of blood and space aliens? Can you make just a comment about that real quickly, and then you can then please continue.
Yeah, from what I've researched, vampires that are real life, not the energy draining vampires that we know several people like that just drain the energy out of us. But the real blood-sucking vampires, supposedly they use that as a cover-up to drain the blood of their the livestock. And if they remove their eyes or their tongue, or they do some kind of weird surgical cut, then it puts the pressure off them, because their best friend is everybody not believing in them. So they can continue to roam, do whatever they want. So with Rupp, that first started happening. Then the town had noticed that the town drunk. They found him dead within a mile of this guy Rupp's cabin. And now this was back in the 1890s. So they found him a mile away from his cabin, Rupp's cabin, drained of blood. Then there was a guy a peddler that come in, and he was, the snake oil, the tonics. He was trying to push all this stuff. Well, he ended up dead, and he wasn't too far from Rupp's cabin, drained of blood. And then the body count started piling up. So these kids had followed Rupp back to his cabin. And as they looked inside, it looked like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. He had flesh, blood, all kinds of stuff inside his cabin. There was bones. He had been, just feeding on these corpses and stuff. So they went back, told the townspeople, and they went, and they had formed a mob. They showed up at the cabin. Rupp was not there, and they burnt the cabin down, and nobody had seen Rupp since. So after hearing that story, I thought, well, maybe there is some legit stuff to this vampire stuff. Usually folklore comes from something that people have, something in the past. Where there's smoke, there's usually fire. It has come from.
I was getting ready to say that exact quote, Matt. Where there's smoke, there's always fire. You can, everybody says, all the skeptics say, "Oh no," well, they're wrong.
Exactly.
Correct.
So I got started looking into history, and I was like, well, what are the first known cases of vampires in the United States? And the first thing that popped up was New Orleans. And we all know Interview with a Vampire, stuff like that was all based off the New Orleans. A lot of these TV series from Anne Rice. So my first thought was, okay, I'm going to look into this. So I had to go there, had to investigate. So my first place was, where do these vampires originate in the United States? So there is a convent in New Orleans. It's the Ursuline Convent. Back in the 1700s, I believe it was about 1728, the town was just building. They had no brides. All the women that were there were just thieves or criminals. So you had all these rich aristocrats that were, needing actual good wife material. So your first mail order brides basically were these casket girls. And they were nicknamed the casket girls because they were brought in from France in the 1700s. I believe it's 1728, around that era. And they had, they showed up, they had these papers, and they had these cases, small bags of their stuff. Well, there was one particular group that showed up that they had no documentation. Nobody knew where they came from. And they had these huge trunks. Now, these convents, that Ursuline Convent it was full of nuns. They were bringing these women up to be good women, good wife material for these rich politicians and stuff that was going through the town. But this particular group of women, they had no paperwork. Nobody knew where they came from. They showed up, huge, like I said, crates. They had one specific thing when they showed up at the convent. They asked if they could put them, do not open these crates until necessary, until we say, it's okay. So they put them in the third floor. So they put the third floor up there, and well, the nuns, they kind of got curious, as anybody would. Why don't they want these opened? What do they mean? Not until it's okay. So they go up there and they look, and the case or the boxes or caskets, whatever you want to call them, they were trunks, were open with nothing in them. And the very top of the convent, the shutters were opened, and they were open up at night. So a lot of people believe that's where the first vampires came from. They believe that either they brought them there or they were the vampires. Now, I believe that they were actually just bringing the vampires over, because they went out in the sunlight and the sun would burn their skin. But I think it was just where they weren't used to the sun, just getting sunburnt, because you go to Louisiana and it is hot. I've spent a lot of time there this past year, and it is super hot there.
It is.
So, so that is where they believe. So I started looking into more of the history. And then in 1902, there was a case. Is everybody heard of Saint Germain, right? He is the immortal. A lot of people had talked about him being the immortal. He was looking for the, eternal life, the blue flame. People had said that they've seen him on Mount Shasta. They've seen him everywhere throughout the years. And he supposedly had walked back whenever with Jesus, and he was at the Last Supper or before then, somewhere around there. Well, so I get a looking into it, and Saint Germain, this guy named Jacques Saint Germain, had a apartment there, and it was there on the corner down. And if you've ever been to the French Quarters, it's pretty crazy there. But I actually whenever I went there, I actually looked at his place where he was, and the corner there, where his apartment was, supposedly, 1902, I believe, is when this episode happened.
All right,
so,
now, Matt, I want to stop you there, and I've got an important question for you. So, if we go down, because our friend Elijah Henderson, he is actually a distant relative of the Comte de Saint Germain, and he wants to come down with us to New Orleans. And what you're saying is that the exact spot that the Comte de Saint Germain actually lived, correct?
Correct. And what's pretty wild is it's diagonal. If you're at the Ursuline Convent, they got all these walls up, and it's directly, like, just right across from the Ursuline Convent, diagonal from there. You can see it when you're standing there at the Ursuline Convent. Now,
okay, what floor did Saint Germain live? First floor.
Okay, he was on the second floor. And this is what brought the attention around. This guy, he was probably in between. He wasn't very tall. Probably about, five in between.
5'6", 5'6", 5'7"?
Yeah, 5'6", 5'7", 5'8", somewhere around there. Wasn't super tall. He was in his mid-40s, and he had hosted all these parties, and he had rich people showing up and all this stuff, but he never ate. He had all that, they ate and drank at his party stuff, but he never ate. He was never seen eating. Well, in 1902, there was a woman that had jumped from the second balcony, and she was a prostitute, and she was running down the street, and she's like, went to the police, and she had said that this Saint Germain had tried to drink her blood. So the cops go back there, and there's nobody there. He's gone. They search his apartment. There is no food in his refrigerator, which is very odd. If a person's living in a place, it's going to have something, something in there to eat. Well, only thing they found were bottles of wine. So they thought they were wine. Well, they had pulled out the bottles of wine, and I don't know if they dropped one and it busted open, but somehow they had checked out see what was in these bottles of wine, and it appeared to be, it was blood. So this guy had no food. He had blood in these wine bottles. So that really led me on this, hey, I've got to get down there to New Orleans to check this stuff out for myself and ask locals, what is the local lore?
Hey, Matt,
And
can
yeah,
can I ask a question? So it seems like, based on your stories, that there seems to be something about New Orleans where there was a settlement that happened, and part of the settlement could be the literal migration of, quote, vampires. Now I'm thinking, where was this originated from? Was it somewhere in Europe? Obviously, because I don't know the time period that exactly you're talking about, but I imagine early New Orleans period. There's European influences and different influences. Could not just the vampire influence, but as well some of the folklore kind of trickle into kind of this port, be imported through New Orleans? And is there any like evidence of that?
well, okay. It had actually came from France. They had come from France. New Orleans, they don't even have counties, they have parishes. Everything is French. So it's basically you know, French in the United States. France in the United States basically is what this whole place is. Now, a lot of people were saying it was Bram Stoker's Dracula or whatever. So I got to looking into it, and my curiosity, I'm like, so, what is the deal with this convent? The people, like Saint Germain, stuff like that. So I start doing some investigating, and I needed to talk to the locals, need to see what they thought. If you've ever been to New Orleans, that place is crazy energy. I mean, it is wild. It is off the chart. You got stuff from voodoo. You got stuff from different people like Papa Legba, who's supposedly the keeper of the crossroads. You've got Marie Laval. You've got all kinds of stuff going on. There's all kinds of murders, ghost stories, everything in this area. And so I get a looking, and the convent, supposedly they nailed the third floor, the shutters. The Pope had blessed like 80,000 or 8,000 screws or something, silver screws, to keep the shutters closed at night. And so they screwed them shut. People go to my Facebook page. You can see I posted pictures before because I went there, took pictures of them. And the top floor is sealed off. Don't know if it's to keep them in or keep them out. We don't know. But
now, Matt, let me ask you this. Can we, as just people going down to visit New Orleans, can we go into the convent during the day?
you have to book a tour, but they will not take you to the third floor. And supposedly one of the caretakers there had claimed that the third floor had all kinds of caskets, had like a bunch, like new, like I don't know why, but I'm thinking there's around 80 or something like that caskets up there. I don't know for sure if that just could be rumors, folklore. But I did notice one thing when I was there. I was listening in. The town promotes tourism. So if they're on a ghost hunt, they are out front of the convent. First thing if you're going to promote a town, you want tourism, you want people coming in, right? You're going to want, hey, let's bring a crowd in. Let's make up some crazy stories. Let's enhance them, make them super special. But when they come to the topic of vampires, they shied away from it. They were like, no, that's just folklore. These girls that come over this convent, stuff like that. They pushed you away from it. And that is one thing you would not want to do if you're wanting to promote tourism. That is, they didn't want people checking it out for some reason. And that right there was my first clue.
Hey, Matt, just listening to you, and the only thing that comes to mind is, like, is there any type of history of occult or even, like you mentioned, voodoo in that area? I imagine, because just the proximity to the Caribbean, obviously, you might have that influence in Southern culture. Like when I hear drinking of blood, or I hear occult ritual having to do with, potentially dirt from a coffin or a coffin in itself and closing an area off. Is there like it comes to mind that there might be some type of ritualistic thing that might have been like a religious ceremonial type of thing going on. Like, is there
Well,
any evidence of that with you?
of course, you had Marie Laval. She was the big voodoo queen. A lot of the stuff was voodoo from, you know, from their history, everything like that being brought over. Now there are cults. Now this is where I wanted to get down to the bottom of it, because there are groups in New Orleans that are supposedly, they call themselves vampires. They try to practice the ritual of drinking blood, but they are not real true vampires. They are just me or you, just wannabe vampires. So they bring in the practice of drinking blood. So you've got that different cult of people that are there. Now, this is where it gets kind of cool and wild. Is I get down there to New Orleans, and I stayed in the old French Quarters, and I stayed at the St. Pierre Inn, which is an old blues, place where all your B.B. King and all them always stayed at. You got a lot of jazz, blues stuff, history there too. Well, my first night there, I get there, and so I'm like, I need to find out, from these locals, what is going on down here. Well, my first night there, pretty wild. It's raining. It is cold. I go into my room. The woman opens the room. I walk in there. I still got my bag on my shoulder, and I walk in there and I look down, and a bare foot track, wet footprint appeared on the floor. I snapped a picture of it. I was like, wow, that's pretty wild. And I was on the phone to a friend of mine that lives in Florida. And because she was asking me what I was doing, I was like, well, I just arrived down here in New Orleans for my investigation of vampires, and I already had this paranormal case going on straight from my room. As soon as I went in there, and this room has an old brick fireplace in it, the door and stuff. It's, a lot of weathered. It's an old place, old establishment.
Matt, I've got a terrible question to ask you. How much was the room?
It was during the off season. I got it during the week of Christmas, so it was right around $100, I believe, per night.
In other words, very reasonable.
Yes.
Okay, great.
But they get you at the parking.
Matt, we got to check those things out, don't we?
Yes. Now the parking down there is no public parking. You have to pay like $50 a day to park in a parking lot, and you have to pretty much walk everywhere.
Oh, so it was $150 a day.
Yes, exactly. But you got a discount, but I didn't know that for getting the room until after I done parked my car in the $50 slot. Then they say, oh yeah, we offer it's like $35 parking with the promo code from our hotel, but it's too late because I'd already paid for my parking at the convenient parking spot close to there.
Okay, just checking.
So I'm in there, and I tell her, I'm like, there's a footprint. She's like, is it yours? I said, no, I just came in the room. It's raining out. Could have been moisture. Somebody could have been in there barefoot. I said, I'll take a picture of it, snap picture of it. And I only had 4 toes, which was weird. Then, so after I set my bag down and I go to put my foot next to it to compare size, then it disappeared. Anybody that knows me, there's a bare foot track, right? They can tell you it definitely wasn't mine, because I keep my socks on all the time. I never take my socks off unless I'm shower or whatever, swimming. That's the only time I ever take my socks off. So you got a bare footprint that just disappears. So it already started off pretty cool.
Now, real quickly, you say barefoot. Are you talking about a human foot with nothing on it, or you're not talking about the print of a bear, the animal?
No, not a bear. A bare footprint of a human. So.
Okay.
Was this in a historic building at all? Like, was it something from the 1800s?
Yes, in the St. Pierre, the old blues. If you look it up there on, you can Google it, look it up. The old St. Pierre, it's where all the blues players stayed at. A lot of them. They got room numbers. It's got like B.B. King and all them on it.
So potentially apparition footprint, you're saying?
Yes. It was some sort of a human footprint, but it only had 4 toes, which was odd, I thought. But so of course, snap picture of it, and
Maybe the foot was only partially materialized in our physical realm, where it just captured those 4 toes. You know what I
Mark,
mean?
Mark,
could-
I've got a question. I just
Yep.
saw a dark figure walk past you in the background. Could that be a human or something else?
I've got 2 other friends in the room. They were just sitting on the side, so when they might have walked by the
Okay,
lamp,
just,
and that's what it was.
I'm sorry,
Okay.
just checking. You know
Okay.
how that
got a
is.
shadow person going through,
Yeah,
huh?
I got not
That's
just
right.
I got a few shadow people too in here. I'm just joking. Uh, but yeah,
But
it's really interesting though that the fact that it was a historic building and things, and something like footprints or an impression that was left by a potential spiritual figure or entity.
exactly. So first spot I had to hit, I did some research, and I'm like, I got to talk to these locals. There's this bar called the Dungeon, supposedly a vampire bar. You are not allowed to video. You are not allowed to take pictures. You're not allowed to have your phone out for any of that type of stuff. It's kind of hard to look it up, even if you look it up on Google Maps. So that's my first spot. When I get down there, I'm like, yes, okay, that's the spot I got to hit. Supposedly the folklore behind it is because this old vampire hangs out in there. That's why you're not allowed to take videos or pictures. So, of course, you know me, not the badass monster hunter if I don't go after the monsters. So I go straight to that place, and it's wild because when you go in there, the hallway, the pathway to this place is a narrow place. If you meet somebody else there, either somebody's going to back up or you're going to have to get sideways and get up against the wall, and really uncomfortable.
Awesome.
And once you get in there, it's really dark. It's really kind of crazy. You got gothic stuff going on. Everybody's super quiet, kind of keep to themselves somewhat. They got little chatter and stuff. So I get in there, I'm looking around, and so I order a drink, I sit down. Of course, I'm by myself at the time. I was supposed to have some family and friends go, but stuff canceled. So, of course, I went alone. And I'm in there, and this gentleman and this girl show up, and they sit next to me. And he says, "What are you looking for?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "What are you looking for?" He said, "You're not from around here." He said, "I can tell by your accent." He said, "I can tell by your actions. You're not from around here." And I said, "I'm just here checking out stuff, trying to figure out a little bit of folklore about this area, some of the history." And he's like, "Well," he introduced himself. He said his name was DJ. And we get to talking. He starts telling me about some of the stuff that goes on around there. And of course, my first topic is the vampires. And I'm asking him, I'm like, "So what is the deal with this convent, this stuff?" And he's like, and I'd asked several people later on after this just to confirm, a lot of locals will not go in front of that convent in between midnight and 6 a.m. There have been numerous reports of the shutter doors on that third floor being open at night. And there was this one huge place right not too far, it's pretty close to the convent, that locals have seen people on the very top of it where the Pope would stay. And they said that they thought this guy was going to commit suicide, but instead of jumping, he flew up into the air, which was pretty crazy.
So it sounds like we had a shapeshifter there.
That or a possible vampire.
Well, if it's a vampire, it would still be a shapeshifter because it would
Exactly.
turn into a bat. So
Exactly.
that's something that I've kind of reasoned that vampires are simply shapeshifters of one form or another. Okay,
So,
wanted to get that
uh,
in there.
yes, definitely. Yeah, they can take different forms, whatever. Well, this guy, he starts to inform me that he said there's 2 types of vampires. he said that there are ones that are born vampire. That's the only way that they are vampire. They're a species, kind of alien-like looking. Like if you look at the Nosferatu stuff, where they didn't have no hair. They kind of had like bat ears or like, pointed ears like a troll or something or a elf. And he said the only way to become a vampire like that are to, they're born vampires, a species. He said, but the ones that are dangerous are the ones that walk amongst us. I said, what do you mean? He said, those are the ones that they had transformed. And they transform a human into a vampire by feeding on them for 4 days or longer. I was like, wow, that's kind of interesting. And he said, of course, it's just like they look like me, you, or anybody else. So it was weird. So I go back and I start thinking about, the whole human stuff, the history, and I'm like, well, that's pretty crazy, And he was giving me all these locations to look at, all these places, these people to talk to, the homeless people. There's lots of homeless people there. He said, you need to go and talk to them. And he was telling me this one voodoo shop. I can't remember the name of it. I've got it written down. But I asked this guy, he's like, whenever you come back, he said, hit me up. He said, maybe we can hang out again. And you're in a bar. It's 3:00 in the morning. You're drinking. How many people do you talk to that you don't ever think much about, right? Well, he gives me his phone number. He says he does not have social media. Has no form of social media. And I'm like, cool. Okay, that's odd. But everybody nowadays has some sort of social media, whether it's Instagram, Facebook, whatever. Well, this guy had none. So I'm like, all right, that's a little weird, but okay. So I get his number. And while I'm there, I start doing some more investigating. And I had looked and I was looking up and the people that feed, like the Saint Germain, I'm like, well, was there really a Saint Germain here in New Orleans? There's got to be some sort of evidence. So if you go back through and look in the history, now the incident with Saint Germain where the girl had fell off the hooker had fell off the balcony. It was not the year supposedly 1902. So I go back and I look, and if you look through, what do you call it, where they do the
census records?
Yes, census records, exactly. There was, from France in 1890, a Jacques Saint Germain had arrived from France into New Orleans in 1890. So 12 years later, the story of this Saint Germain, if everybody knows, if you look through history, Saint Germain, supposedly the alchemist, he's looking for the eternal flame, eternal life. And so there's huge history with him. What did he find it? Did he become a vampire? Was he fed on? So I'm looking, I'm like, well, it's got to be something up with these being fed on, for 4 days. And brings us to, as me and Dr. John were talking about earlier, the Carter brothers. In 1932, in New Orleans there were two brothers. They were small guys. They worked on the docks. And the year was 1932. Supposedly, they had a young girl had escaped from their apartment and went to the police, and she had been fed on. So while she was being fed on, she comes back and she tells the cops, hey, these guys are drinking my blood, all this stuff. The cops show back up to the apartment. Carter brothers are not there, but they find like several dead bodies. I believe one report says 14, another says something else. So they got 14 bodies drained of blood there that are dead. Then they had 3 other victims that had been fed on. And the other 3 victims that were being fed on had been there longer than the 4 days that it takes to become a vampire, supposedly from the guy that I talked to in the dungeon. Now, quick note about the dungeon was when I asked him about vampires hanging out in there, he told me that there was an old vampire used to hang out in there. He quit hanging out in there because of too much tourism, people coming in there looking for him, which I thought kind of cool. This guy knew a little bit, info. Well, so so as I'm looking into the whole Carter brothers stuff, story goes that the cops show up there, they see all these victims, they see these others. There was 2 men and a young boy. The Carter brothers show up. Now these 2 brothers are probably 5'5", 5'6". They're very small guys. And they said 5 or 6 cops could not handle one of them. They were super strong. They flung them off. They jumped off the second balcony to the street and ran away unharmed. So then the cops went down. They found out, of course, they worked at this dock. They went down to the dock, and supposedly the Carter brothers seen it and they gave up. They were just like, you know what? We're tired of this life. This is what we are. We are vampires. We don't like living this lifestyle. We don't like having to feed off people. So they were sentenced and they were hung. So they were put to death. Now, everybody knows New Orleans, Louisiana, it's below sea level. So all the tombs and stuff, the graveyards are above ground. They put them in the family crypt. They go back to the family crypt when more people from the family were to be put in there, and their bodies were gone. Now, the history of supposedly the 3 victims that were still alive that were being fed on, one of them had become a serial killer, and he killed like 30-some people, and all their bodies were drained of blood. The other one, the other male, he had went to another country or something and had killed hundreds of people, but they don't know if their bodies were drained of blood or not because he had dissolved the bodies in an acid.
Sounds like H.H. Holmes up in the serial killer up in Chicago.
Yes.
H.H. Holmes.
So the young boy, the family had actually supposedly, from what they say, don't know if it's true or not, but they had burnt the whole house down with the boy in it. His mom and dad did. They said, you did not bring back our son. That was not our son that came back. So, it makes you think, was Saint Germain transformed a day? Was he one of these people that was transformed? His eternal life? Did he find what he was looking for? But I got looking back more of the history too, and there was supposedly in the 70s, with the Ursuline convent, there was supposedly 2 reporters had showed up. They're ghost hunters reporters, and they had hung out in front of the convent, and it was around 2 or 3 in the morning. There was 2 reporters that stayed. A couple others had went to go get some food. They were getting hungry, and when they left, as they were leaving, they noticed that a shutter was open at the 3rd level of the convent. The other 2 had crawled over the wall, and they had snuck in there, and the next morning, supposedly they had found almost decapitated, drained of blood. So, the whole vampire thing got me really curious into it. And
Matt, can I ask you something?
Yeah.
Like, modern day, kind of when we think about like blood and there's some general themes that you're talking about, like eternal life and whatnot. Have you heard about the whole adrenochrome thing, or even like we think about like stem cells, like being like something that can regenerate, right? Now, what if like back in the day there was that technology that was kind of known within the elites, where there was like a way of like life extension, life technology that involved blood, draining blood of say young victims, and interjecting it in themselves, like a blood transfusion that we think of today. Back in the day, they would have probably thought they would have called that a vampire if they didn't know the technology. Correct. Now, what if that was kind of known through certain circles, occult circles, or certain bloodlines, literally, that came into Americas at that time, and now it's developed to more of like a modern day, you know what I mean, scientific way, being like life extension or like more of a biological base, if you know what I mean.
Well, if you look throughout history, even the Bible talks about the blood is the life. That right there, I think that says a lot. Of course, the adrenochrome, supposedly, they take it. These elites take it gets adrenaline going on these children, whatever, and they consume it. Helps keep aging down, and yeah, there's a lot to do with the blood. I mean, there's a lot to do with that.
We will let's defer the topic of adrenochrome until a later episode. We will
Yeah, that's
do
a
some
that's a
research to do that. So let's
touchy topic right there.
Yeah, is that okay, guys?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But it just might have explained not just the adrenochrome part, but as well, just like the drinking of blood or blood transfusion. Maybe there was some kind of crude way that they were doing it back in the day, that where they found a corpse that was drained of blood. Oh, it must have been a vampire. Well, no, maybe it was something that they were draining blood for scientific purposes or some other purpose.
Right.
That could include a transfusion or a crude way of that back in the day as well.
Right. We can get onto that another time. That will be certainly an interesting episode. All right, Matt. So the Carter brothers. So they're hanged, they're buried in the crypt, and they're gone.
Yes.
Has anyone seen the Carter brothers since?
Supposedly them and Saint Germain. That a lot of the people that live in the current apartment where the Carter brothers used to, residents will talk about seeing them on the balcony. They will see two individuals on the balcony. Same way Saint Germain, supposedly even to this day, that it usually happens whenever it's rainy. A lot of these kids will show up down there that, they're kind of homeless. They just kind of hang out down there. They're in a group, and this young guy middle-aged guy in his mid-40s, named Jack, they called him Vampire Jack, still frequently shows up to these places there in New Orleans. Same way with the sightings of the Carter brothers. Still, supposedly two brothers show up every now and then. Now, I had a weird experience because they always said that. So I wondered about that. The guy that I talked to at the bar. Me and you had talked about this, John. So
right, and I even talked to him on the phone. You gave me his phone number. I talked to him once.
And see, he, I gave him my number, and he had contacted me several months later, which was odd. And he's like, "Hey, when you coming back down here?" And I totally forgot about, hey. So I started linking stuff back up, and I'm thinking this guy's name was just DJ. So all the names of Saint Germain, everything usually started with a J. Jacques Saint Germain. That they called him Vampire Jack. I don't know what the DJ would be, but it had a J in it. So I'm like, hey, possibly this guy don't have social media or anything. But when I did message him not too long ago asking him about Saint Germain, he never replied. I tried calling him ever since I mentioned the vampire stuff about Saint Germain. He has never contacted me back. Another weird thing, they always said that they showed up usually whenever it was raining, stuff like that. It was about 4 a.m. I left the dungeon. It was raining, nasty, and I had left. I was going back. I was walking back to my place there in the French Quarters, and been to New Orleans in the middle of the night. It is crazy. Down these alleyways, I could hear moaning, just weird stuff. And it wasn't like a pleasure man. It was like somebody's in pain or something. And as I'm going, I get approached. A real fancy car shows up. This guy had pulled up, real nice fancy car. It's 4 a.m. in the morning. Nobody's out on the streets. You could just hear weird sounds coming from the alleys. I'm the only one walking down I'm really close to the St. Pierre by then, and just leaving the dungeon. And he asked me if I would like some sexual services, and I'm like, excuse me, no, thank you. And he said, and it was weird because this guy was wearing a real nice suit. You could tell he had money. And a lot of people say, well, maybe he was a pimp. He was trying to do this, but it was weird because I felt like he was asking for himself. If you've ever seen Jeffrey Dahmer, vampire stuff, they use the sex thing to bring somebody in. And he talked with a weird accent. This guy's got money. You could tell by this car, the way he was dressed. And he looked like, if you've ever seen Medea, the guy that plays Medea, Tyler Perry, is what he reminded me of. He's really nicely dressed, 4:00 in the morning. This guy's offering, this guy's got money. Why would he just go up to a random stranger? Which I thought was very odd. And he talked with a weird accent. He's like, excuse me, sir, and he offered, and I said, no, thank you. And he's like, okay, you have a wonderful evening. And he talked with a weird accent, and he was really polite, really nice, and he drove away. Then the next night, I'm down there, and this young gentleman approaches me and asks me if I have a quarter. And if you've been to New Orleans, these people are always asking you for money, for food, all kinds of stuff. This guy had asked me for a quarter. I'm like, a quarter? He said, yeah, I need a bus. Just need to catch a bus ride home, man. And I'm like, okay, so here's my, I grab into my pocket. I'm looking around to see if, make sure somebody's going to try and mug me or pickpocket if he's got friends around. And I pulled out $1. I said, I might have $1 or something. He said, no, I don't need $1, man. He goes, I just need a quarter only. I said, well, if I got $1, you can have it. And he's like, no, just a quarter. So I get digging around my pocket and I have a quarter. I give it to him. And I'm like, here you go. And I thought it was very odd. He said, thank you. God bless you. And he walked away. And I thought that was very odd, just a quarter. So I start talking to a friend of mine. And she's like, a quarter? She goes, have you not heard the pirate thing? Have a quarter, have mercy. No quarter, no mercy. I'm like, no, I've never heard that. So she explains to me that people back in the day with the pirates, stuff like that, if they can offer you some help to, okay, if you are generous, then they will spare your life. She said, by having that quarter that night and you being generous, that saved your life. I said, what do you mean? She said, if you had to kill to survive like a vampire, how would you choose your victims? I said, got a good point. Would you, the selfish, the whatever? And I never thought about it that way.
Matt, I've got a question
Okay.
to ask you. So he was asking for bus fare, right?
Yes. And there is no bus fare, just a quarter in New Orleans.
There is, right. It's several dollars. I wanted to mention that.
Yes.
Hey,
You look
Matt,
up the rate.
Matt, can I ask you about something before you're mentioning the two different kind of species of vampire? There was
Uh-huh.
one that had much more like organic features, you're saying, like pronounced ears and features. And then there's ones that look like us, but they're supposed to be still vampires. For me, that sounds like there's some type of hybridization going on, like in modern, especially in the modern kind of UFO realm of things of, alien hybrids and things. Do you think that potentially this is another species that either one has lived alongside us the whole time, it's always been there, or another dimension, parallel dimension, or whatever else that's here alongside us, using us, harvesting us, and then potentially breeding with us, so that it's indistinguishable whether, like, they could be, even our politicians or whatever, this other species that's alongside us that we historically have attached to being vampire, for lack of better words.
Well, I believe it is definitely like an alien race. If you've noticed these modern day vampires now, they have portrayed vampires. If you've watched, what was that show on Netflix, Midnight Mass? The vampire had wings. He was bald like the Nosferatu. If you look at the last voyage, what was it? The Demeter, the boat that Dracula had arrived to, on in Europe or whatever. In that movie, the vampire was portrayed as he was bald, had the pointed ears, had the wings. I believe it is like you said, an alien race. Do I believe it's a politician, stuff like that? No, I don't believe that. But I know what you're talking about with the reptilians and stuff like that on the supposedly, the other race, but the elites. But this race, I believe it's very own species. If you noticed, if you look into the Mothman or Batman of Chicago, there are tons of sightings of this exact same creature that is portrayed in, like I said, that movie Midnight Mass and the Last Voyage of Demeter, the vampires. If you look into the history right around Chicago since 2017, it's really taken off. In O'Hare Airport, these bat-like creatures with wings. What would be a perfect place to take victims? Chicago. That place is loaded with homeless people. It is loaded with, just another mystery. All these people missing. And you've got, if you can actually go on Google and check out all the sightings of these bat-like type creatures. I believe there is a link to that with the supposedly vampires.
And the second thing that's kind of a follow-up is obviously the whole cattle mutilation phenomenon that involves sucking of blood or removal of tissues and organs and things like that. Now, and then if you link that with potentially the alien abduction side of things where people are in a trance and they're in this other world and whatnot, and potentially some, biological thing being done, removal or like implantation being done. Now, potentially, could this back in the day being mistaken for a vampire, in their layman's terms, right? And like if you were from the 1700s and you were explaining an alien abduction or something that involved this, how would you explain it? Potentially vampire would have been the way to explain it. And then as it's progressed in our general knowledge, I'm just throwing out there the idea that
certainly, Mark, you certainly would not explain something in 1650 as a space alien that came down from a UFO. You just wouldn't do that.
But like, so say you're at that time and you came across a cattle that got its things removed. How would you explain that? Oh, it was a quote vampire, right? Like, or something like along those lines, like something a cryptid mythological creature. Now, that being said, it still very well could be this type of interdimensional being or extraterrestrial being as well. So I'm just trying to think. It's like, is what they explained back in the day potentially something that modern day we can attribute to being extraterrestrial?
Oh, absolutely. And what was kind of cool, I'm glad you brought about the cattle mutilation, is because up here, vampire Rupp, first signs were cattle mutilation, stuff like that. So I get looking back into the history, and out west, well, there is a place out in Colorado, and of course, they say the vampires that they'll remove that stuff to keep the heat off them, so people will think it's some kind of government alien, whatever, thing going on. Well, so I got a friend I went to school with, and he was telling me about a place. His dad was in the Air Force, and his mom had stayed on site with him. He went to Colorado. He was stationed in Colorado, and there was a place out there that they were out driving around, and he had come across these farmers were mad because something had been mutilating their cattle and draining them of blood. And they got mad at him when he drove up close to it, and they harassed him, and they, so he got out of there. Well, I got another good friend who, Dr. John's good friends with him too, had told me a story that he's a country music singer. He was out on tour. And if you go out west, there's places, he was in Colorado, same place where that guy from school was telling me about, that he'd asked for gas for his tour bus. And they told him, skip the next town because that place is no good. And he's like, well, what's so wrong about it, you know? And they said, have you ever seen the movie From Dusk Till Dawn? And he's like, well, yeah. And they said, it's the real deal there. All the locals were telling him that in this little Colorado town. Skip that town, go to the next place to get gas. Do not stop there. So he listened to them. And what I thought was odd was a friend from high school was talking about the cattle mutilations there. So what you need to do is we need to look into where these cattle mutilations are going on. Look into the towns and look for the missing people reports to see if there is a link. So if they're using, what better way to hide is for people not to believe that vampires are real. You know, if we don't believe in them, you're not going to be looking for them. And to hide under more UFO, alien, cattle mutilation stuff for food, stuff like that. And I thought that was pretty wild, that story. And of course, he didn't stop me. First thing I would have done was drove right into that place and said, hey, what's up? But that wasn't me. But I do know where that place is, so I hopefully in the future will be checking it out.
Wow, that's pretty incredible, Matt. I tell you what, we're getting close to the witching hour for ScaryCast tonight. This has been a great talk. You've given us a lot of information on your explorations with vampires from New Orleans to Ewing, Virginia, to Colorado, to everywhere. So I'm going to ask Mark to ask you one more question, and then I'm going to give you, Matt, the last word tonight. Mark, do you have one more question for Matt?
Well, first of all, I just want to say it's been amazing listening to this. Has been one of the best podcasts I've been on with you guys, and my favorite movie was Interview with the Vampire. So it's kind of linked it all together, and in the folklore of vampires and folklore in general of cryptids in southern United States, especially, sounds like there's a rich history there. I just want to know again, Matt, is there any link between vampires that you know of and the whole UFO phenomenon, which is something that I've always want to research and that I kind of instinctively connected to, that there might be something there. So I just want to hear what your thoughts are on that.
I believe they are totally different species. Whether they are of this world or not, I do not know. If it's from a different galaxy or universe, whatever, you know, I don't know any of that. But I do know that supposedly they are hiding behind the using the alien stuff to cover up their tracks. They'll drain the blood, then they'll remove the tongue, eyes, stuff like that to make it look, blame it on something else out of this world. Whether it's true or not, it's all still speculation. But whether it's, you know, the whole UFO, I've never heard of a vampire with, you know, being seen with a spaceship or anything like that. But I do know that there's lots of different stories and stuff that I've investigated that they try to cover it up with the UFO alien stuff. They cover up their existence.
That makes sense. Using the whole UFO thing as a psyop for the real reality of what's going on.
Correct.
Wow.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay, great, Mark. Thank you for your last question. And Matt, the last word tonight on ScaryCast is yours.
All right. Just people keep an open mind. Everything out there, the world is not as it seems. And believe in the unbelievable. Don't stay in that closed box. Go out, investigate stuff for yourself. I guarantee it. People have experienced stuff that cannot be explained. So just quit thinking inside the box. We were programmed since birth to believe in this one system. If you don't go to school and learn their programs, what happens? You get thrown in jail for truancy. But, you know, keep your eyes open. Keep your eyes to the sky, everywhere else around you. The world is not as it seems. Believe in the unbelievable.
Okay. Thank you very much. Well, this is Dr. John Stamey saying thank you to everybody for listening to us on ScaryCast, broadcast on iHeartRadio. And also, we're coming back to Bigfoot and Company on YouTube. Thanks to Mark, our buddy, doing some technology there for us. So we're everywhere. Find us, send us an email, let us know what you think. And we look forward to seeing you next time on the
Like-
one. Yes, sir.
Like and subscribe our YouTube page if you're listening to this. I'll post it here.
That's right.
Make sure to follow us there as well.
That's right. Thanks a lot. All right. We'll see everybody next time on the one and the only. There's only one ScaryCast from Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Cheers.
Have a good night, everyone.
Good night, guys.